But it was soon clear, as so often in a constituency surgery, that the real problem was something else. No one was trying to understand her feelings about Brexit. No one was trying to bring her along. She felt so downcast, she said, that she was thinking of leaving the country to Canada. It wasn't so much that she wanted to be in the EU, she just didn't want to be in a Britain that was not in the EU. And I recognise that feeling of grief and alienation because in the last 18 months I've heard the same sentiments so often from friends, from family, from people hailing me abusively in the street, as is their right. In many cases, I believe the feelings are abating with time, and as some of the fears about Brexit do not materialise. In some cases, alas, I detect a hardening of the mood and a deepening of the anger. I fear that some people are becoming ever more determined to stop Brexit, to reverse the referendum vote of June the 23rd, 2016, and to frustrate the will of the people. I believe that would be a disastrous mistake that would lead to permanent and ineradicable feelings of betrayal. We cannot and will not let it happen. But if we are to carry this project through to national success, as we must, then we must also reach out to those who still have anxieties. And I want today to anatomise at least some of the fears and to show, to the best of my ability, that these fears can be allayed and that the very opposite is true, that Brexit can be grounds for much more hope than fear. And I think there are essentially three types of concern about the momentous choice the nation has made. The first is that this is simply a strategic or geostrategic mistake. On this view, Britain is an offshore island comprising fewer than 1% of humanity, and we need to be bound up in the European Union for protection, partly for our own protection, and partly so that Britain can fulfil its historic role of providing protection for other countries of the European continent. I come across quite a few people who think that Brexit has cast us adrift, made our geostrategic position somehow more vulnerable, while weakening the security of the whole of Europe. The second anxiety is essentially spiritual and aesthetic, that by voting to leave the EU we have sundered ourselves from the glories of European civilization. People believe that we have thrown up a figurative drawbridge, made it less easy to live, study, work abroad, and decided to sacrifice the Europeanness in our identities. They fear that the Brexit vote was a vote for nationalism and small-mindedness and xenophobia. They think it was illiberal and reactionary, and that the British have shown the worst of their character to the world, indeed that it was in some sense un-British. And the third objection is the one that occupies most of the debate, the economic fear that we have voted to make ourselves less prosperous, that membership of the EU is vital for UK business and investment, and that the panoply of EU legislation has helped to make life easier for companies and for citizens. People fear the disruption they associate with change, and that our friends and partners in the EU may make life difficult for us. Sometimes these economic anxieties are intensified by other fears, the others about identity and security, so that hitherto recondite concepts like the single market or the customs union acquire unexpected emotive power. Well, look, I believe whatever the superficial attractions of these points, they can be turned on their head. And I want to show you today that Brexit need not be nationalist but can be internationalist. It's not an economic threat but a considerable opportunity. Not un-British but a manifestation of this country's historic national genius. And I can see obviously that I'm running the risk in making this case of simply causing further irritation. But I must run that risk because it is this government's duty to advocate and explain the mission on which we are now engaged. And it has become absolutely clear to me that we cannot take the argument for granted. We cannot expect the case to make itself. That was the mistake of the pro-EU elite in this country when they won the last referendum in 1975. as the Guardian journalist, the late Hugo Young, points out in his book, This Blessed Plot, the most corrupted trait I kept encountering was the sense so prevalent among the Euro elite that having won the decision, they had won the argument. Many exhibited the unmistakable opinion not only that the battle was over, but the other side, however loud it shouted, had simply lost and should now shut up. And he went on to say, the noisier the contest became during the early 1990s, the heavier the silent gloating that accompanied it, from the class that knew it commanded every operational forum, from the antechambers of Whitehall to the boardrooms of big business, from Brussels committee rooms where 1,000 lobbyists thronged to the outposts of the Commission. Well, the boot is now on the other foot, at least in theory. For all their power and influence, every major political party, the CBI, Barack Obama and so on, those voices did not prevail. But is this the time now for the referendum winners to gloat? Should we sit back in silent self-satisfaction? I don't know how many were on the side of leave here today. I don't mind. I don't think we should. It's not good enough for us now to say to Remainers, you lost, get over it. Because we must accept that the vast majority are actuated by entirely noble sentiments. A real sense of solidarity with our European neighbours and a desire for the UK to succeed. All I am saying is that by going for Brexit, we can gratify those sentiments and more. So let me take the three anxieties in turn. To all who worry about our strategic position and the supposed loss of Britain to European security, I can offer this same vital reassurance that the Prime Minister has made so many times, and I believe is welcomed by our partners. Our commitment to the defence of Europe is unconditional and immovable. It is made real by the 800 British troops from the 5th Battalion, the Rifles, I saw recently at Tapa in Estonia, who have since been relieved by the 1st Battalion, the Royal Welsh. Already this country is the single biggest spender in the EU, both on aid and defence. Although we represent only 13% of the EU's population, we contribute 20% of defence spending, and the RAF's giant C-17 transport aircraft represent 100% of the heavy lift capacity of the whole of Europe, as well as 25% of the overseas aid budget. It makes sense for us to continue to be intimately involved in European foreign and security policy. It would be illogical not to discuss such matters as sanctions together, bearing in mind that the UK expertise provides more than half of all EU sanctions listings. We will continue to be Europeans both practically and psychologically, because our status as one of the great contributors to European culture and civilization, and our status as one of the great guarantors of the security of Europe, is simply not dependent on the Treaty of Rome as amended at Maastricht or Amsterdam or Lisbon. So let's next tackle the suggestion that we are somehow going to become more insular. It just flies in the face of the evidence. It was my Labour predecessor, Ernie Bevan, who said, my foreign policy is to go down to Victoria Station and go anywhere I damn well please. And that is pretty much what the British people already do. We have a bigger diaspora than any other rich nation, 6 million points of light scattered across an intermittently darkening globe. There are more British people living in Australia than in the whole of the EU, more in the US and Canada, and as I've just discovered, more than 1 million people who go to Thailand every year, where our superb consular services deal with some of the things that they get up to there. The statistical, on which I make no comment, the statistical trajectory suggests that this wanderlust is most unlikely to abate. In 2016, the British people made 71 million visits to other countries. That is a 70% increase since the mid-1990s, and now more than 1 foreign trip per person per year. If we get the right deal on aviation and visa-free travel, both of which are in our mutual interest, this expansion of UK tourism will continue, not just beyond the EU, but within the EU itself. We will continue to go on cheapo flights to stag parties in ancient cities, where we'll receive, I'm sure, a warm welcome, and meet interesting people fall in love, struggle amiably to learn the other European languages whose knowledge of which, by the way, has suffered a paradoxical decline during our membership of the EU. And there's no sensible reason why we should not continue to be able to retire to Spain or indeed anywhere else, as we did indeed long before Spain joined what was then called the Common Market. We can continue the whirl of academic exchanges that have been a feature of European cultural life since the Middle Ages and whose speed of cross-pollination has been accelerated by the internet, as well as schemes like Horizon or Erasmus, all of which we can continue to support and whose participating scholars are certainly not confined to the EU. For those who really want to make Britain less insular, and we all want to make Britain less insular, don't we? Well, I jolly well hope we do. Policy exchange. Dean, you want to make Britain less insular, don't you? Yes, sir. Thank you. Good. For all those who want to make Britain less insular, the answer is not to submit forever to the EU legal order, but to think about how we can undo the physical separation that took place at the end of the Ice Age. Fly over the channel at Dover, and you see how narrow it is. The ferries plying back and forth like buses in Oxford Street. And as you measure the blue straits with your fingers, you can see that this moat is really an overgrown prehistoric river that once flowed down from the mountains of Norway and was fed by its tributaries, the Thames and the Seine and the Rhine. Indeed, Britain and Holland used to be joined in the old days by a territory known as Doggerland. The customs of Doggerland are now lost to history. In 1986, Margaret Thatcher and Francois Mitterrand had the vision to heal the rupture with the first dry crossing. And it is notable that Eurotunnel is now calling for both sides of the channel to prepare for a second fixed link. It does indeed seem incredible to me that the fifth and sixth most powerful economies in the world, separated by barely 21 miles of water, should be connected by only one railway line. I accept that the solution is still a few years off, though the need will be upon us fast. But I say all this to signal something about the attitudes that should inform Brexit. It's not about shutting ourselves off. It's about going global. It's not about returning to some autarkic 1950s menu of spam and cabbage and liver. It's about continuing the astonishing revolution in tastes and styles, in the arts, music, restaurants, sports, that has taken place in this country in my lifetime, not so much because of EU membership, that would be to commit the fallacy we know in the Foreign Office's post hoc, ergo propter hoc, but as a result of our history and our global links, our openness to people and ideas that has brought 300 languages onto the streets of London, probably the most diverse capital on earth. In that sense, Brexit is about re-engaging this country with its global identity and all the energy that can flow from that. And I absolutely refuse to accept the suggestion that it is some un-British spasm of bad manners. It's not some great V sign from the cliffs of Dover. It is the expression of a legitimate and natural desire for self-government of the people, by the people, for the people. And that is surely not some reactionary Faragist concept. It is to fulfill the liberal idealism of John Stuart Mill himself, who recognised that it is only the nation, as he put it, united among themselves by common sympathies which do not exist between themselves and others. Only the nation could legitimate the activities of the state. It was only if people had this common sympathy that they would consent to be governed as a unit, because this feeling of national solidarity would make them cooperate more willingly than with other people. This is Mill again. Desire to be under the same government, and desire it should be government by themselves or a portion of themselves exclusively. And there is a good reason for insisting on this national solidarity or common sympathy, because government involves tremendous impositions, by which we collectively agree to taxation that preempts half our income and obedience to laws, not all of which we think are necessarily sensible. If we're going to accept laws, then we need to know who is making them and with what motives. And we need to be able to interrogate them in our own language. And we must know how they came in authority over us and how we can remove them. And the trouble with the EU is that for all its idealism, which I acknowledge, and for all the good intentions of those who run the EU institutions, there is no demos. Or at least we in the UK, I don't think, have ever really felt part of such a demos, however others in the EU may feel. The British have plenty of common sympathies with the people of France. Of course we do. But it is hard to deny that we also share common sympathies with plenty of non-EU people, Americans, Swiss, Canadians, Pakistanis, Thais. And that is one of the reasons why we in the UK have had such difficulty in adapting to the whole concept of EU integration. To understand why EU regulation is not always suited to the economic needs of the UK, it's vital to understand that EU law is a special type of law, unlike anything else on earth. It's not just about business convenience, it's expressly teleological. It's there to achieve a political goal. The aim is to create an overarching European state as the basis for a new sense of European political identity. British politicians, Labour and Tory, have always found that ambition very difficult. It's hard to make it cohere with our particular traditions of independent parliamentary and legal systems that go back centuries. And in spite of many sheep-like coughs of protest from the UK, the process of integration has deepened and the corpus of EU law has grown ever vaster and more intricate, and ever more powers and competencies have been handed to EU institutions, culminating in the Treaty of Lisbon. Now we have arrangements of such complexity and obscurity that I ask even my most diehard of Remainer friends if they can explain the Spitzenkandidaten process. Can you? Anybody here? Explain that it's part of our constitution. The Spitzenkandidaten, which genuinely delights MEPs in Strasbourg, but mystifies us in the UK. Or can you explain the exact relationship? Here's one. The exact relationship between the EU's Charter of Fundamental Rights, justiciable in Luxembourg, and the European Convention on Human Rights, whose court sits in Strasbourg. Starter for 10. How many people in this room actually know the answer to those questions? I think very few. I think the answer to the second one is unknowable. How many know the name of their Euro MPs? And that's the point I sometimes make when I get a chance to get the ball back over the net to those who hail me with their cheery four-letter epithets in the street. That's the point, isn't it? At least they know roughly who I am. At least they know, roughly speaking, what I do, generally speaking. They do. If we wanted to find the person who is responsible for drafting the next phase of EU integration, in which Tony Blair and others would presumably like us to take part, we wouldn't know where to find them, who they are, let alone how to remove them from office. And that is why people voted leave. Not because they were hostile to European culture and civilization, but because they wanted to take back control. And that's why it's so vital that we don't treat Brexit as a plague of boils or a murrain on our cattle, but as an opportunity, and above all, as an economic opportunity, which brings me to the last of the crucial reassurances that my side of the argument must give. We would be mad to go through this process of extrication from the EU and not to take advantage of the economic freedoms it will bring. We will stop paying ever more colossal sums to the EU every year, and as the Prime Minister herself has said, that will leave us with more to spend on our domestic priorities, including, yes, the NHS. We will be able to take back control of our borders, not because I'm hostile to immigrants or immigration, far from it. We need talented people to come and make their lives in this country, doctors, scientists, the coders and programmers who are so crucial to Britain's booming tech economy. It was my proudest boast as Mayor of London that we had 400,000 French men and women living in the British capital, high-earning, high-spending types, while only about 20,000 UK nationals went the other way, lived in Paris. And we've got to stay that way. We must remain a magnet for ambition and drive. But we also need to ask ourselves some hard questions about the impact of 20 years of uncontrolled immigration by low-skilled, low-wage workers, and what many see as the consequent suppression of wages and failure to invest properly in the skills of indigenous young people. We don't want to haul up the drawbridge, and certainly not to minimise the wonderful contribution they've made. And certainly we don't want to deter the international students who make such a vital contribution to our higher education economy. 155,000 Chinese students alone. But we want to exercise control. And if we're going to move from a low-wage, low-productivity economy to a high-wage, high-productivity economy, as we must, then Brexit gives us back at least one of the levers that we need. And I'll tell you what, it's very striking, isn't it, since the Brexit vote, that the fortunes of UKIP, the one stridently anti-immigration party in this country, have gone into a long-deserved eclipse. And that is, I think, because people feel they are being heard in their desire, at least, for control. And the contrast in this country is very striking with some of the other countries, the Schengen countries, where no such control is possible and where the far right is, alas, on the rise. And as the Prime Minister has repeatedly said, we must take back control of our laws. And it would be obviously absurd, as Theresa May said in her Lancaster House and her Florence speeches, which now have the lapidary status of the codes of Hammurabi or Moses. It would be absurd if we were obliged to obey laws over which we have no say and no vote. As the Prime Minister said at Lancaster House, remaining within the single market would, to all intents and purposes, mean not leaving the EU at all. The British people should not have new laws affecting their everyday lives imposed from abroad when they have no power to elect or remove those who make those laws. And there is no need for us to find ourselves in any such position. To those who worry about coming out of the customs union or the single market, please bear in mind that the economic benefits of membership are nothing like as conspicuous or irrefutable as is sometimes claimed. In the last few years, there have been plenty of non-EU countries who have seen far more rapid growth in their exports to the EU than we have, even though we pay a handsome membership fee, as I have mentioned many times. In spite of being outside the stockade, the US, the United States, have been able to increase its exports twice as fast. I think there are 36 countries around the world that have done better than us in exporting into the EU, even though they aren't members. And for those of us within the stockade, the cost of EU regulation is estimated at 4% of GDP by Peter Mandelson and 7% by Gordon Brown, authorities which, for the purposes of this argument, I do not propose to dispute. It's only by taking back control of our laws that UK firms and entrepreneurs will have the freedom to innovate without the risk of having to comply with some directive devised by Brussels at the urgings of some lobby group with the specific aim of holding back a UK competitor. That would be intolerable, it would be undemocratic, and it would make it all but impossible for us to do serious free trade deals. It's only by taking back control of our regulatory framework and our tariff schedules that we can do these deals and exploit the changes in the world economy. It's a striking fact that our exports to the EU have grown by only 10% since 2010, where our sales to the United States are up 41%, to China 60%, to Saudi Arabia 41%, New Zealand 40%, Japan 60%, South Korea 100%. This country now has a £25 billion trade surplus with South Korea. Who'd have thought that when we were kids? Unbelievable. These figures reflect the broader story, that the lion's share of the growth is taking place outside the EU and especially in the Asia-Pacific region. In a world that demands flexibility and agility, we should be thinking not of EU standards, but of global standards and a regulatory framework to suit the particular needs of the UK, a country that already exports a higher share of its GDP outside the EU than any other EU country. We already boast an amazing economy, diverse and very different from the rest of the EU. We're the nation that has moved furthest up the value chain of the 21st century economy. We're a nation of inventors, designers, scientists, architects, lawyers, insurers, water slide testers. I met one in my constituency, Toblerone cabinet makers. All the Toblerone cabinets in Saudi Arabian airports are made in Uxbridge, I'm delighted to tell you. There are some sectors, such as AI or bulk data, where we really excel. We're streets ahead. And in the future, we may want to do things differently. And of course we're going to have to comply with EU regulation insofar as we're exporting to the EU. Though we should realise that the single market is not quite the Eden of uniformity that it is cracked up to be. You try becoming a ski instructor in France. Not that I've tried myself. And I discovered the other day we have totally different standards in this country for flame retardant sofas, to say nothing of plugs. But in a global marketplace where we are trading in products that hadn't been conceived even 5 years ago, serving markets that were poverty-stricken 20 years ago, it seems extraordinary that the UK should remain lashed to the minute prescriptions of a regional trade bloc comprising only 6% of humanity, wonderful though it may be, when it is not possible for us or any individual EU country to change those rules on our own. And insofar as we increasingly turn to the rest of the world, as we are, then we will be able to do our own thing. We'll be able, if we choose, to fish our own fish, to ban the traffic in live animals, to end payments to some of the richest landowners in Britain, whilst supporting the rural economy. We'll be able to cut VAT on domestic fuel and other products. We can simplify planning, speed up public procurement, and perhaps we will then be faster in building the homes that young people need. And we might decide, that it was absolutely necessary for every environmental impact assessment to monitor 2 life cycles of the snail, or to build special swimming pools for newts, not all of which they use in my experience, but it will at least be our decision to do that. Freed from EU regimes, we will not only be able to spend some of the Brexit bonus on the NHS, but as we develop new stem cell technology, in which this country has long been in the lead, it may be that we will need a new regulatory framework, scrupulous, moral, but not afraid to be different. The same point can be made of innovative financial services instruments, where the FCA already leads the way. We will decide on laws, not according to whether they help to build a United States of Europe, noble goal though that may be, but because we want to create the best platform for the economy to grow and to help people to live their lives. And the crucial thing is that when we're running ourselves, and when all these freedoms are open before us, we'll no longer be able to blame Brussels for our woes, because our problems will be our responsibility and no one else's. Indeed, no one should think that Brexit is some economic panacea any more than it is right to treat it as an economic pandemic. On the contrary, the success of Brexit will depend on what we make of it. And a success is what we will make of it, together. And that very success will be the best thing for the whole of continental Europe, a powerful adjacent economy, buying more Italian cars, German wine than ever before. I never tire of telling you we're the biggest single consumers, not just of champagne, but of Prosecco as well. And we want to go on. We want to go on in that role. And so I say to my remaining Remainer friends, actually quite a numerous bunch, more people voted for Brexit than have ever voted for anything in the history of this country. And I just say in all candour, if there were to be a second vote, I really think it would be another year of turmoil and wrangling and feuding in which the whole country would be the loser. So let's not go there. Let's instead unite about what we all believe in. An outward-looking, liberal, global future for a confident United Kingdom. Because so much of this is about confidence and self-belief. We love to run ourselves down. In fact, we're Olympic gold medal winners in the national sport, in the sport of national self-deprecation. And in the current bout of Brexcosis, we are missing the truth that it is our collective job to ensure that when the history books come to be written, Brexit will be seen as just the latest way in which the British bucked the trend, took the initiative, and did something that responds to the real needs and opportunities that we face in the world today. That we had the courage to break free from an idea, however noble in its origins, that had become outdated, at least for us. Konrad Adenauer said that every nation had its genius, and that the genius of the British people was for democratic politics. He was right, but perhaps he didn't go far enough. Yes, it was the British people who saw that it was not good enough for kings and princes to have absolute power, and who began a tradition of parliamentary democracy in a model that is followed on every continent. It was also Britain that led the Industrial Revolution and destroyed slavery, and the British people who had the wit to see through the bogus attractions of protectionism and who campaigned for free trade that has become the single biggest engine for prosperity and progress. And so I say to my constituent, rather long answer to a constituent's query, don't go to Canada or anywhere else, lovely though Canada is. This, the UK, is the country that is once again taking the lead in shaping the modern world. And it is our stubborn attachment to running ourselves that will end up making our society fairer and more prosperous. In its insistence upon democracy, in its openness, its belief in the rights of the individual, in its protection of our legal system, its scepticism about excessive regulation, its potential for devolving power downwards, and in its fundamental refusal to discriminate between all the other peoples of the earth, and in its central distinction between a political loyalty and obedience to the EU institutions and our eternal love for European culture and values and civilization. Brexit is not just the great liberal project of the age, but a project that can, in time, unite this whole country. So let's do it with confidence together. Thank you very much. Right, who can help me with that? Who wants to go first? I can't remember. Yes, go on. Go on.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Andy Bell, 5 News. Are you still saying we can have our cake and eat it? Or are you now prepared to say to the British people, there are some hard choices here. If you want to have these free trade deals, we are going to have to be out completely of the single market. And British trade with the European market will have to suffer as a result. Are you prepared to say that to the British people now? Or are you still saying, you know what, we can have everything we want?
I repose my confidence entirely in what the Prime Minister had to say at Lancaster House and in the Florence speech. She was right. We can do a great free trade deal with the EU. We can make sure that we have as frictionless trade as is possible to devise, and we can simultaneously take back control of our tariff schedules and our regulatory framework and do great free trade deals. I think we can do that. It will take work, but it will take effort, but we need to get on and do it. I think we should do it with confidence.
So no hard choices?
I think we need to get on and do it, is my view. Yes, please, sorry.
Vicky Young, BBC News. You seem to be making the case for divergence from the EU as soon as possible, maybe as soon as next year when we leave. Is that what you're saying? And what is your message to Cabinet colleagues who have the completely opposite point of view?
Well, if you're talking about the implementation period, Vicky, then no. What I'm saying there is obviously during the implementation period, as Theresa has said, things will remain as they are. It's very important for confidence and for certainty and all the rest of it. So I realise that there's been some misunderstanding about that. I'm glad to clear that up. Yes.
Foreign Secretary, what do you say... Oh, Angus Walker, ITV News, forgive me. Foreign Secretary, what do you say to those people who say yet another speech from a cabinet minister on Brexit, yet another speech on Brexit?
I think we've had nearly enough.
On this Valentine's Day, they might say enough of your sweet nothings. Where is the clarity? Where are the clear answers?
The carrot.
The clarity.
The clarity. Okay, God, carrot.
Enough of your sweet nothings. Where's the clarity on the key questions from citizens, workers and businesses, the practical solutions to the pile of valid questions that Brexit brings forth?
Well, as I say, I think you have an abundance of clarity in the Prime Minister's Lancaster House speech. It's there in Florence. What I'm trying to address is a feeling that I pick up talking to people in the street, in my constituency and elsewhere, that they're not getting the message from loudly. I know you've had enough speeches on Brexit, and I apologise if this is yet another Brexit speech, but we've got to get over the positive agenda. And I think there is a great positive agenda. We need to get out there and explain it. And it can be good for carrots too. By the way, since you didn't mention carrots, but we will be able to take back control of our agricultural policies, and it may be that we can do wonderful things with our own regulations to promote organic carrots or whatever. I don't want to speculate. Michael Gove has proposed all sorts of wonderful things we can do with independent agricultural policy. There are things we can do outside the EU that will, I think, be of economic benefit to this country, and we need to start thinking about them now. We need to start planning for how it will work. It's a global economy, and we need to be very, very confident in what the UK can do. We need to get going. Yes.
Robert Nisbet from Sky News. You are a fairly divisive figure, Foreign Secretary. Do you think that you are the right person to be reaching out to those Remainers? And do you regret?
You've got to reach out, haven't you? You can say that's all very well. So you're saying that if you don't, then people are going to say you're ignoring them, and or that you don't care, and that you're not trying.
But some of the language you have used has been quite inflammatory towards some of the Remainers.
Has it? Well,
supine protoplasmic invertebrate jellies, for example.
That was about the London Assembly. That was, as far as I can remember, that was about the...
But you don't hold back in your language, so do you regret some of the language perhaps you used during the EU referendum and since then? And so now it may seem a bit strange that you're trying to reach out to some of those people. I don't wish to contradict you in any way, but I think I've always been extremely moderate in my language and loving and caring, and that is my intention. I do think that sometimes the discourse does become a bit polemical, and I think it'd be much much better if we could all get together and get behind this project, and that's my purpose. If I accept what you say, there's always a risk of simply exacerbating things, but actually I think it's much better to reach out and engage and talk to people than to hope the problem will go away, because that is the mistake. Quite frankly, that's the point I made in my speech. That is the mistake that the pro-EU integration side in this country made after 1975. They decided that they'd won, they had all the big battalions on their side, and they didn't need to make the case for the European Union. And so they never actually advanced any of the idealistic arguments. They never said it would be a great thing for Britain to be part of the United States of Europe, and we should think of ourselves, we should join in a federalist construction. They never had the guts to make that argument. If they had, then some people might have listened, but they never did. And so my job is to try to engage with people, to see what their fears are, and to try to address them. And I really think that people's fears are unfounded, and we can make a great success of this. Tom.
Tom Newton-Dunn from The Sun. Foreign Secretary, you've clearly set yourself against any agreed alignment with the EU after Brexit. I presume that also means on manufactured goods. If the Cabinet, however, decide they will do that, will you make your own offer of solidarity and unity today and guarantee you won't resign from the Cabinet this year? Well,
Tom, look, we're all very lucky to serve, and I'm certainly one of those. But I think the point you make about alignment is a very good and a very interesting one. It's all about voluntarism. It's all about who decides. Of course, when it comes to EU standards for washing machines or hairdryers or vacuum cleaners or whatever, it may very well make sense for us to remain in alignment as a matter of choice, something we elect to do, and that I'm sure there are many. For the purposes of supply chains and so on, there are many businesses who understand the need for that. But I don't think we should necessarily commit, as a matter of treaty, that forever and a day we are going to remain locked into permanent congruence with the EU. I mean, it doesn't seem to me to be a sensible thing to do. If you're going to come out, then you might as well take the advantages of difference. And as I said in my just now, there may very well be occasions in which a lobby group on the continent, I mean, and if you talk to James Dyson about his vacuum cleaners, he'll make this point to you. They decided to vacuum cleaners more than 900 watts, I think it was,
should not be allowed. He made, as I understand, look, I'm not a great expert on vacuum cleaners, but he made a pretty powerfully sucking vacuum cleaner, and the EU decided that they didn't want it, and there may be good arguments, good environmental arguments against such products, but what we shouldn't allow, but we are at least round the table to make the case. And what we shouldn't allow is when we're not round the table for new regulations to be imposed in a way that we can't contest. I think that would be peculiar. I think it would be anti-democratic and very hard to justify.
Gentleman there at the back, name and organisation, please.
Yep. Sorry. Hi, Francis Elliott, The Times. Mr. Johnson, do you believe in negotiating a trade deal with the EU, that the EU citizens should be guaranteed some sort of preferential treatment when it comes to immigration controls post-Brexit, or should there be a level playing field? And can you imagine a scenario in which it would be in the UK's post-Brexit interest for immigration to run at above 100,000?
Thanks, Francis. The exact relationship with EU citizens is and how that's going to work is currently under discussion, as you know. And I think I'd probably better not go beyond what I've already said. I think one of the greatest successes that we've had so far in the negotiations, which are going well, by the way, they are going well, is that we've been able to get a very good deal on citizens, on EU citizens in this country, and have been able to show that we value them, show that we care for them, and to offer them some what I think is a pretty reasonable package. And we hope, obviously, that there will be something symmetrical for UK nationals, the 1.2 million UK nationals in the EU. And you had a second question. Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not going to get into a numbers game. I've made my position on immigration pretty clear already today. I think there's an argument about low wage, low skill immigration. I don't think we need to. I think it would be a mistake to close off talent. I really do.
Gentleman there. Name and organisation.
Chris Hope from The Telegraph and from Chopper's Brexit podcast, Foreign Secretary. You mentioned in your speech that Britain is going through a bout of Brexcosis. Is Theresa May the cure for this dreadful disease?
Yes. Yes.
And
okay,
she
yes.
is. And second,
Chopper,
and
yes.
to add on to that, do you worry that this uncertain approach to Brexit that we're feeling in this country is because we have a PM who won't say she'll vote for it today?
I think that the answer to your first question is yes. The cure for Brexcosis is exactly the one you described. How many questions am I going to take here, folks? I mean, this is going to be. Well, okay, let's take two more.
Lady there in the
go on.
A hand up, yeah. Name and organisation.
Hi there, Jessica Elgott from The Guardian. Foreign Secretary, do you think that some of the anger that's fueled Remainers has come from your own government, where they've been described as saboteurs or citizens of nowhere? Do you think it was a mistake to use those kind of phrases?
Who said that?
Prime Minister on the steps of Downing Street when she said that people were trying to obstruct Brexit.
Right.
Do you think that kind of language from government was a mistake?
When I've heard her, it has been always ironic, and she understands the task that we have. We have to bring people along with this project. And, I accept that this morning I'm not going to persuade everybody. But I've got to try, and I've got to make the effort, because in the end, these are people's feelings, and people's feelings matter.
One final question.
Matt Fry.
Thank you. Yep. Somebody at the back. Do I see anyone? Do I see anyone else? That was raising my hand high. Gentleman there in the middle. Yep. Name and organisation.
Paul Waugh from Huffington Post. Foreign Secretary, Donald Tusk said that there will be no Brexit cakes on the table, only salt and vinegar. The Prime Minister's given up salt and vinegar crisps for Lent. Have you given up cake?
I don't want to make some sort of frivolous, pat, trivial, off-the-cuff answer, Paul, at this late stage in the press conference. I think we can. No, I think we can do a great. I think the Prime Minister can do a great Brexit deal.
and a Brexit deal that can unite the country. And that is what the whole cabinet wants to achieve. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
We will make America great again.